My story today is about my favorite store growing up, my favorite store. You have to understand that I grew up in northern Wisconsin in a little bitty town, not even 500 people, and it was in the war years, when the World War II years, when I was growing this way. And in our little town, we thought we were really fortunate because we had two stores. And the two stores each had a grocery side and what my mother called the dry goods side. And a lot of rural areas had those kinds of stores. These were fairly good-sized buildings, but they were fun stores. There wasn't much else there. There was a feed mill. There was a co-op gas station. We had a Five and Dime. We had a Ben Franklin, and we were really proud of that. And we had a bank and a few other things, and a drugstore that had been there forever. And in this grocery store, it was called Erickson's Grocery Store. Now, we thought we were really proud of Erickson's because it was a chain. There were three of them. One was in a town about 15 miles one way, the other one was in a town about 30 miles the other way, and then our store. But of course, ours was the biggest, so we were really proud of that. And when you came to Erickson's, you went up just a little curb off the sidewalk, and you got and a few steps, and you came in. And at the right where you came in, to your right, was where the candy was. Now, the candy was kind of like the candy we have today, but they had bulk candy too. And they had lemon drops in bulk, and they had horehound candy. Now, how many of you have ever tasted horehound candy? It's a unique taste, and I don't really know. To me, it seemed like it was kind of a maple and a licorice and kind of sour in a way. But you might have found something else, some other way to explain it. But for me, that was mine. The nice thing about horehound was my mother always kept it because you could also use it for cough drops. And on the right side was the grocery side. And they had not mixes like we have today. Everything was to do it yourself from scratch. But the produce area was pretty good, particularly in the summer, because the women who were from farms would have big gardens, and they would bring their produce to town to sell. And so we had wonderful heads of lettuce and broccoli and all the kinds of things that they would grow that maybe your mom didn't grow in her garden. And one of the things that we kids always looked for in the produce departments was oranges, because we only had oranges when it got late fall, close to Christmas. And we knew when we saw oranges in the store, Christmas was coming soon. And that would mean that on the dry goods side, they would have a few more things that we would be interested in. But my favorite spot was way back on the right-hand side. And first there was this little room where they candled eggs. Now, unless you're old like me, you don't know what candling eggs is. But they had, the women would bring in their eggs and they sold them to the store. And they had this little light box type of thing, and they would hold the egg over the top of it. And if it had a little chick or membrane where the chick was going to come, of course they couldn't sell that. And really that's the way eggs are candled today, but not one at a time in the back of the store. And so they would candle the eggs, and that was fun to watch. Then they had in that back corner, they had two rooms. One was pretty good size and had frozen food lockers that people could rent. And we lived in town, but we always bought a half a beef and a pig in the fall and had them butchered, and that's what we would store in two lockers. And then when we got down, around Christmas time, we could kind of make it into one locker and rent that. So when we would come to town, or to the store to get our groceries and so forth, my mother would go back there, and she had a little key, I believe, and open the locker, and she would take out the meat that she was going to have for the next few days. Now, I was trying to explain to someone what it smelled like. And I can't quite come up with the smell. If you're old enough to remember the chest-type lockers or chest-type freezers that maybe you only opened once in a while, you have some idea it smelled cold, but there was just sort of a frosty smell to it, and and I like that smell. I would go in and I'd go, so I could get that smell. But as I got a little older, something happened that made me like the room next door better. And that's where they had the beef and the pork carcasses hanging before they would butcher them. Now, the people on the farms would just hang theirs outdoors, and they would freeze in northern Wisconsin, and they had it, or they would put them in their barns, and then they would, a few days, because you have to cure the meat a little bit. But one day, one weekend, the game warden had given my dad a venison roast, and my mother was making it for Sunday dinner. So we went to church, and there were some people at church and that had lived in Milltown for a while and then moved away. And she asked them to come for dinner. So she had the roast and the gravy and the mashed potatoes, all the things that everybody ate in those days in the 40s. And he was sitting at the head of the table, and he kept asking, "Please pass the roast. This is the best roast I've ever had." And nobody said really anything about it. And then he said, the last time he asked for it, he said, "Our beef all tastes just terrible because they hung it in that room with the venison. And now it made our beef taste so bad that we can't hardly eat our venison." Of course, I was about this high, maybe about 6 or so, and I wanted to say, "But you're eating venison, you're eating venison." My mother's over there with her hand. And I knew enough to be quiet about it. So after that, when I would go with her to the store, if she didn't watch me, I'd always be back there looking in that room, and it was the first I knew that they hung the venison in there. So I was always trying to figure out which was which was the beef and which was the venison. The pork was kind of easy because I knew that wasn't as long an animal. I finally discovered that the skinny ones were the deer. So, and then on the other side where they had the dry goods, that was kind of a great place for a kid to browse around. They had a few toys, not too many that I was interested in because they thought the girls liked dolls and I was more interested in other things. I love books, and they didn't have very many of those. But they had lots and lots of bolts of fabric, and I liked to look at the fabric because if I found something and I was good enough and I could tuck my mother into it, she might buy it and make me a dress out of it. And you had to have a new dress to start school, of course, in the fall, and maybe for Easter and for Christmas. But that was the time when flour sacks and feed sacks served a dual purpose. And maybe you don't remember that if you're as old as I am, or maybe you've never heard of it. But flour sacks were fabric, and that's what you made your dish towels out of. And of course you embroidered them, one for Monday, one for Tuesday, one and so forth throughout the week. And then the feed sacks, they didn't have the feed sacks in the dry goods area there. You had to get them, if you didn't buy feed, you had to get them from somebody who did. And of course, sometimes we ended up with all of us with a dress out of the same kind of fabric because that's a particular shipment that got all the same kind of feed sacks. So, but they had wonderful fabric there. They had clothes for men, particularly. They had like work shirts and pants, and then they had underwear for women and kids and that type of thing. No little dresses for little girls or anything like that. But one thing they had that really fascinated me was women's girdles. And that embarrassed my mother because I always wanted to look at the girdles. Well, I knew that my mother wore a one-piece girdle. It was all one piece, and then you hooked the stockings to a garter here and two in the back. And they had a whole different array of girdles. So my favorite thing was to see, do they have anything new? And then in church, I would look at all the ladies and try to imagine what kind of girdle that lady bought for her shape. So that was my favorite store. It was a fun time of growing up. And I tell you just one more thing. This was a Scandinavian community. And Scandinavians often eat lutefisk. Now, I don't know if you know what lutefisk is, but lutefisk is a cod, I believe, a white fish, and it's dried in a lye solution. And they used to bring it in the wintertime, and it would be in big wooden barrels. And the barrels would sit outside. Now, we never had it at my house. My mother didn't want it because she said she was never eating that. When she used to work at the store down the street, the dogs would come up by those barrels. And she knew it didn't get inside, but she wasn't eating that lutefisk. But then you take it home, and you have to soak it because it's dried, and then you and get rid of all that lye and everything, and it's cooked, I believe, in a white sauce. My father-in-law thought, my father-in-law thought it was great. We didn't have it in our house, and I was really glad for that. Everything else they had in the store was wonderful.